the Grouchy Nerd.
Alright, quiet down, knuckleheads. It's time to take another look at a new hero pack for Fantasy Flight Games Marvel Champions. This time we're looking at Psylocke. Well, that's just Psy. Betsy Braddock and her twin Brian were born to Elizabeth Hartwood and Sir James Braddock, the latter of whom was brought to the 616 by Merlin. Yeah, that Merlin. Sir James was a member of the Captain Britain Corps, a group of interdimensional protectors, a mantle he eventually passed on to Brian. As a teenager, Betsy moved to New York in pursuit of a modeling career, and it was during this time that her mutant powers suddenly and quite violently began to develop, making her an extremely powerful psychic, telepath, and telekinetic. She even spent some time herself as Captain Britain, but this was cut short when she was ambushed and blinded. Brian rescued her and reclaimed the Captain Britain name. Betsy, who learned to use her telepathy to get by without eyes, accepted a marriage proposal and retired from heroics, but was kidnapped from that peaceful life by Mojo, who rechristened her Psylocke and gave her new, very creepy eyes. She was rescued by Cypher and Warlock of the X-Men. She decided to stay at Xavier's Institute to learn more about her powers, having discovered their mutant origin. She eventually earned a place with the X-Men herself, keeping the name Psylocke, which seems like a weird way to process being kidnapped and mind-controlled, but you go, girl. Redefine that trauma. She was kidnapped by the Hand. For a powerful psychic, she gets caught unawares kind of a lot. The Hand body-swapped her with an assassin named Quanon and brainwashed her into becoming Lady Mandarin, who used her psychic powers more offensively and even developed psychic weaponry. She regained her mind but remained body-swapped, and for a time both women claimed to be the real Betsy Braddock. Quanon died along with Betsy's original body, and all of Betsy's memories, which had been split between the two minds, returned to Betsy, forever trapped in Quanon's body. She continued to fight with the X-Men until she was murdered, though she mysteriously returned just a few months later in the exact spot she died. Since then, she's rejoined the X-Men, been part of a team called the Exiles, a reality-hopping team of heroes that protect the multiverse, got her original body back but ended up losing it again, joined X-Force, killed her boyfriend Warren, took up the mantle of Lady Britain of the Captain Britain Corps, a reality-hopping team of heroes that protect the multiverse, psychically compelled Brian to kill their older brother Jamie, and fought King Arthur to win her freedom from Merlin. What? Alright, so let's take a look, but before we do, I have some very exciting news. Psylocke has 2 permanent cards. And somewhat recently, Fantasy Flight Games finally gave a new ruling on permanent cards. Since they're never shuffled into your deck because they can never go out of play, they do not count toward your deck size. So, no more 37 card Spectrum decks, you scallywags. On her hero side, we have Psylocke, who does 1 thwart, 1 attack, and 2 defend, each with an asterisk. She has the Psionic and X-Force traits, 10 health, and a hand size of only 4. It's fine. And the asterisk definition is Psi Energy Control. As an interrupt when you use one of Psylocke's basic powers, flip 1 Psi Energy upgrade. On her alter ego side is Betsy Braddock, who has a recovery of 3. Her X-Force trait becomes mutant, and she gains 2 to her hand size. Her setup instructions are to put your Psi Energy upgrades into play Psi Knife side up, and as an action, you can exhaust 1 Psi Energy upgrade to shuffle 1 Psionic card from your discard pile into your deck. And let's just jump straight to those upgrades. We get 2 of these double-sided cards that have the permanent keyword and the Psi Energy and weapon traits. Starting on the Psi Knife side, Psylocke gets +1 to her thwart, and as a hero, you can exhaust 1 to generate a mental resource, and you may flip it to its Psi Katana side. It still has Psi Energy and weapon traits and the permanent keyword, but it gains the restricted keyword. Psylocke gets +1 to her attack, and her basic attacks gain piercing. This time you can exhaust 1 to gain a physical resource, and you may flip the card back to its knife side. And the puzzle starts to take shape. 4 cards in hand, but you're going to have these 2 cards that generate resources. So you're limited in your choices, but not necessarily in your ability to pay for cards. The Psi Knife side boosts her thwart and gives you a mental resource. The Psi Katana side boosts her attack and gives you a physical resource. And you don't have to flip the Psi Energy upgrades when you use them, but you have the option to. One big thing to note here is the Psi Katana side does gain the restricted keyword, which of course you can only have 2 of, 1 for each hand. So if you wanted to bring another weapon like the scimitar, for instance, you're going to want to pack a side holster as well. Her signature ally is Angel, as played by Warren Worthington III. He gets the Aerial and X-Force traits, costs 3 to get out, has 3 hit points, and does 1 thwart and 2 attack, and as a response when you play him from your hand, ready. Pretty simple, but really solid. Getting to ready and having an ally that does 2 attack, that's great. Now, if you can find a way to keep bringing him back into your hand so that you can keep playing him and keep readying, that's all the better. 3 copies of 3-cost Flurry of Blades is next. It's a psionic attack event. As a hero action, deal 2 damage to an enemy. For each Psi Knife you control, confuse an enemy. And for each Psi Katana you control, deal 2 damage to an enemy. And 3 for 6 is not very good, especially on a kit card, but 3 for 4 damage and a confuse, well, that's much better. Next is 3 copies of a 2-cost psionic thwart event. Mental Detection. As a hero action, remove 1 threat from a scheme. Then for each Psi Knife you control, remove an additional 2 threat from that same scheme, and for each Psi Katana you control, draw a card. This is a really fun one. If you flip down to Alter Ego and the scheme got a little bit out of control while you were there, now you have the option to take off 5 threat with 2 resources. That's really good. Or, once again, if you have 1 Psi Knife and 1 Katana, then you're taking off 3 threat and drawing a card, so then that helped pay for the card that you played to take the 3 threat off, so then it's 1 for 3. Psionic Redirect is next. This one is a 2-cost psionic defense card, and we get 2 copies of it. As a hero, when you would take any amount of damage from an enemy attack, prevent 2 of that damage. For each Psi Katana you control, prevent 2 additional damage. For each Psi Knife, confuse the enemy. Preventing 2 damage is fine. Preventing 4 is great. Preventing 6 is probably overkill, so once again we have an event where you're probably going to get the most mileage out of it if you have 1 Psi Knife and 1 Psi Katana. Now, obviously, if you want to boost your basic abilities, your basic thwart or your basic attack, you're going to want to have them on the same side, whichever side is going to be beneficial to the basic ability that you want to use. But for all of these events, kind of seems better to have 1 of each. Next is 2 copies of Telepathic Suggestion, a 2-cost event with the psionic trait. As a hero interrupt, when you reveal a card from the encounter deck, cancel its when revealed effects. For each Psi Katana, deal 2 damage to an enemy, and for each Psi Knife, remove 1 threat from a scheme. That one's not bad, and it's not necessarily better to have 1 of each on this. If you want to do 2 threat or have 4 damage done, that's either one of those is great. 1 and 2, also great. And it doesn't necessarily cancel the entire card. I mean, certainly there are treacheries where the when revealed text is the entire treachery, but this also would keep a side scheme or something, or a minion coming into play that has a when revealed text. The minion, the side scheme, those would still come into play. You just wouldn't do the bit about when revealed. Then we get 1 copy of Training Regimen, a 1-cost support with the training trait. As an anytime action, exhaust Training Regimen to search your deck for a skill card and add it to your hand. Then, if you're in hero form, discard a card. Both Hone Technique and Repurpose are skill cards, just to name 2, and we're about to see a bunch of Justice cards with the skill trait. This card is awesome, because it helps you find awesome cards. Like Martial Arts Training, a 1-cost upgrade with the skill trait. It gives Psylocke +1 to her defense, and after she defends against an attack, discard Martial Arts Training to ready Psylocke. Worth noting, though, that Training Regimen does only pull skill cards from your deck, not your deck and discard pile, so when you pull the trigger and use this to ready, just keep in mind that you're not going to be able to pull it back out until your deck resets. Psionic Training is another 1-cost skill upgrade. This one allows Psylocke to ignore guard and patrol keywords, and as a response, when she thwarts, you can discard this to confuse an enemy. I love it. Put it into play and ignore 2 of the most annoying keywords in the entire game, and then when you're ready to flip down to Alter Ego and you don't want to have to worry about dealing with a bunch of new threat on the scheme, you can pull the trigger on this one and confuse the enemy. That's great. Last in her kit is Weapons Training, another skill upgrade. This one costs 2 and gives Psylocke Retaliate 1. After she attacks, discard this to ready each weapon upgrade you control, which are each resources. That's great. Or you can do this and then flip down to Alter Ego and you can shuffle 2 psionic cards from your discard pile back into your deck. Amazing. The bad stuff. Betsy's obligation is body swapped. Flip each Psi upgrade to their Psi Katana side and exhaust them. You cannot flip them back to their knife side while this is out. Discard a psionic card from your hand as Betsy to discard this obligation. Thematically, it's kind of great that you can't actually remove this card from the game because she just keeps getting her old body back and then losing it again. Hilarious. But other than that, this card sucks. It costs you the 2 resources that your Psy upgrades would have provided you this turn, and if you had had another restricted card out, now that's gotta go, and you've gotta lose a card as an alter ego just to discard it. That is a rough obligation. Her signature nemesis is Chimera, who has 5 health in the Marauder and Psionic traits. She only has 1s in her stats, but when Chimera activates against you, she gets to add X to either stat, where X is the number of mental resources printed on cards you control. So that'll be on allies, upgrades, and supports, which there aren't too many in her kit that have mental resources, but among them are the Psy knife sides of her Psy upgrades. So that could be bad. And it's maybe something you even want to keep in mind when you're building a deck for her. There's no upper limit here. If all of your upgrades and supports have mental resources, she's going to do some damage. Her side scheme is Interdimensional Plunder, which comes into play with only 2 threat on it. But then you have to place 1 threat here for each upgrade in play, and it has the acceleration icon. Each upgrade in play. So if you're playing with other identities, you gotta count theirs too. It's not just yours, but that means it is getting at least 2 more because of your own upgrades. But remember, telepathic suggestion would allow you to ignore that when revealed text if you happen to have one on hand. Then 1 copy of Psionic Illusion, an attachment that goes on your identity. When you attack an enemy, name a resource type, then discard the top card of your deck. If that card has any resource other than the one you named, change the target of this attack to a friendly character, then discard this card. And I can't find any indication that this can't target you if you don't have an ally in play, so you might be punching yourself in the face, which honestly, it might be better than taking out a whole ally because you can heal yourself a lot easier, but still, that's wild. The last of the bad is Telekinetic Dragon, a treachery. When it's revealed, take X damage, where X is the number of mental resources on cards you control. If you don't control any, it gains Surge. That's pretty nasty, but it is another one that Telepathic Suggestion will defang quite a bit. Again, if you have one. There's only 2. You can't have it all the time. Moving on to her aspect cards, Psylocke came with a Justice deck. Up first is Captain Britain as played by Brian Braddock. He costs 4 for 3 health, the Aerial and Excalibur traits, and 3s in both stats, but they each give him 2 consequential damage. However, he takes 1 fewer point of consequential damage when he attacks a minion or thwarts a side scheme. The 4 cost hurts, but he's good. He's really good as long as you're getting that -1 consequential damage. Pairs very nicely with one way or another, or any deck that's leaning into the player side schemes. Seems like he would be fantastic in a Cable deck. But I mean, 3 is huge. 3 thwart, that's going to take care of kind of a lot of side schemes, and 3 damage is going to take care of kind of a lot of minions. That's awesome. If you're able to put any kind of honorary whatever to extend that a little bit. You do honorary X-Men and mission training on this guy, that's going to get that thwart up to a 5. Next is Cypher, as played by Doug Ramsey. He's a 2-cost X-Force ally with 2 health and 1s in each stat, but after he attacks a confused enemy, draw a card. Really, really solid in any confused lock deck where you're keeping the villain confused as often as possible so you can hang out in alter ego. This guy's awesome for that, and even if you only get to use that card draw twice for his 2 health, you're still drawing double the number of cards that Ironheart gives you. And if you do use that card draw 2 times, then he's paid for himself. Next is 3 copies of Upside the Head, a 1-cost event with the skill trait. After your hero makes a basic attack that damages an enemy, confuse that enemy. If it's already confused, stun it instead. That is very good. And of course, Psylocke's training regimen can dig it out of your deck for you and put it into your hand. But that's incredible. Keeping the villain confused and then possibly keeping it stunned as well, and then you bring in Cypher to punch him and draw you a card, and now once again, it's paid for itself. Lay the Trap is a player's side scheme. It costs 1 to put out and comes into play with 3 threat per identity. It has victory 0, and when it's defeated, the player who defeated it deals 5 damage per identity to the villain. It's okay. Obviously really good in a cable deck where you're putting in as many side schemes as you can possibly fit, but outside of that, it costs 1 to put out plus itself coming out of your hand, and then whatever it costs to get the 3 threat off. Seems like kind of a lot of trouble for 5 damage. Next up is 3 copies of Float Like a Butterfly, a 2-cost upgrade with the skill trait. Play under any player's control, max 1 per player. As an interrupt, when a character you control attacks a confused enemy, increase the amount of damage that that attack deals by 1. Wow. I don't even know what to say outside of wow. Any Confused Lock deck, every Confused Lock deck should have this card in it. Picture Black Widow and Dance of Death. If this is out, Dance of Death is going to do 9 damage. That's amazing! And it's a skill card, so it's another target for Training Regimen. Our first basic card is Pete Wisdom. He's a 4-cost X-Force ally with 3 hit points who does 3 thwart and 2 attack. But that thwart comes at 2 consequential damage, and you can only play him if your identity has the X-Force trait. As a response, after you resolve the when revealed effects on a treachery, heal 1 damage from him. In a whole X-Force deck, especially if you're then using team training exercise to help mitigate that cost a little bit, this is awesome. I mean, you're definitely going to hit treachery, so he's definitely going to get some heals. 3 threat, 2 attack. If you're going to be able to keep him around for a while, yeah, that's good. Then we get 3 copies of Directed Force, a 0-cost basic event with the skill trait. As a hero action, when your hero makes an attack that has overkill, piercing, or ranged, that attack does 2 additional damage, max 1 per attack. There's probably too many heroes to try and list who all likes this, who has access to one of those keywords, but in the case of Psylocke, her Psykatanas give her basic attack piercing. So if you have both sides, Psykatana side up, giving her attack a 3, and then you play this, her basic attack is at a 5. That's great! 1 copy of a 1-cost support is next. IPAC, or IPAC, I'm not sure. An X-Force vehicle which you can only play if your identity has the X-Force trait. As a hero action, exhaust IPAC and deal 1 face-down encounter card to a player. That player draws 2 cards. Now, I have a near pathological aversion to extra encounter cards, but if you don't share that anxiety, I'm sure this card is great. Drawing 2 cards is worth a lot, and if you're not afraid of definitely drawing advance and immediately losing the game, then this would work well for you. Then we get another basic support, X-Bunker. It's a 2-cost location support with the X-Force trait. As an action, exhaust X-Bunker to choose a player who has the mutant trait. That player searches the top X cards of their deck for any card where X is the number of side schemes in the victory display. Then shuffle your deck. Obviously, a cable card. I'm honestly not sure anybody else likes this unless we're about to see a whole lot of player side schemes, which, I mean, we might, but it feels like a cable card. Next is 3 copies of Telepathy, a 1-cost basic upgrade with psionic and superpower traits, and you may only play it if your identity has the psionic trait as well. Max 1 per player. As a hero action, exhaust Telepathy and spend 2 mental resources to remove 2 threat from a scheme. And here, finally, is an argument for the Power of the Mind. Maybe you take 3 copies of Power of the Mind and Genius, and you leave out Energy and Strength, and then you only have resource cards that can trigger this. 2 for 2 isn't great, but if that's just something that you have on hand that you can play when you have nothing else to use a Power of the Mind on, that's pretty good. Our aggression card is Psi Bow Attack. It's a 2-cost psionic attack event, which you can only play if your hero has the psionic trait. Deal 4 damage to an enemy. This attack gains ranged. 2 for 4 is okay. If you then use a directed force to make it 3 for 6, that's still only okay. Our leadership card is Domino in the style of Nina Thurman. She's a 3-cost ally with Posse and X-Force traits, 3 health, and does 1 thwart and 2 attack. But when you use one of those basic powers, swap a card in your hand with the top card of your deck. I love when the ally versions of a playable hero has like a minified version of what their hero's hook is, and in this case, it's Well, it's not as useful as when you are playing domino and can do that, but if you've got a card that you want to punt till next turn, you want to be sure that you're going to see a big threat removal card next turn, you put it on top of your deck and you know you're going to draw it. Or a defensive card that you know you're going to see when the villain attacks you next. Cool. Psy Flail Strike is the protection card. We get 3 copies of this 2-cost psionic attack event, which you can only play if your identity has the psionic trait. As a hero response, after you defend against an enemy attack, deal 3 damage to that enemy and stun it. You get attacked, you defend against it, and then you get to turn around and do an attack back. That's pretty great, though 2 resources and itself coming out of your hand, that's gonna pretty significantly limit you in the upcoming hero phase, but if you're doing 3 damage and a stun? Last is Telekinesis, a 1-cost basic upgrade with psionic and superpower traits, which you may only play if your identity is psionic, max 1 per player. As a hero action, exhaust Telekinesis and spend 2 mental resources to deal 3 damage to an enemy. So it's just like the punchy version of telepathy, which, again, cool. If you have them both in play and you have one or the other there ready to be used when you need it, that's pretty cool. In particular, in Psylocke, what I like about this one is you can have both of your Psy upgrades on your Psy knife side, which will increase her thwart to 3, so you can use your basic thwart to get rid of 3 threat, and then you can still use those Psy knives to generate mental resources, and use this to do 3 damage. Psylocke is a pretty complex hero to play, and that can sometimes be a really good thing. It makes you feel super smart when you kind of figure out the puzzle and get the most out of each turn, but I found that mostly it made me feel like I'd had too much to drink. The low hand size of 4 is honestly pretty limiting. You still have the ability to pay for things because you have those 2 resource generators, but you have fewer options each time, and if you do put resource cards in that deck, you got a pretty good chance of drawing a dead hand with only 4 cards possible. If you draw all stuff you can't use, that sucks. Building her toward Confuse Lock is obviously really solid. She has a lot of synergy with Confuse Lock. Concussive Blow was reprinted in this deck, and she came with a bunch of new cards. Upside the Head, Float Like a Butterfly, Cypher, all kind of leading you toward that style of deck where you get the villain confused, and then you flip down to Alter Ego. You can hang out there pretty safely, not getting punched, then come back up to Hero, do a little punching yourself, confuse again, flip back down. It works pretty well. It's a pretty fun style of deck to play. Scimitar is great for her, though you might think about bringing along a side holster in case you want to use both of your Psy Katanas, then you're not restricted by that restricted keyword. Being psionic means that she can make Cerebro fire off to its full potential. She can search her entire deck for an X-Men ally. For instance, Professor Xavier, who also has the psionic trait. So you use Cerebro to find him. He comes into play. He does whatever insane good thing that you use Professor X to do. Use him to block, or he just goes out of play. Then you use Betsy Braddock's Alter Ego ability to take a psionic card from your discard pile and put it back into your deck. Then you use Cerebro again to go find him again and bring him into play again. What a fun combination. And of course, Training Regimen is absolutely insane. If you're an Alter Ego, you just get to go find another card that you either then go into hero form and get to play, or you just help pay for something else in hero form. Worst case scenario, it replaces a card in your hand, and you can just discard a card that you weren't going to get in play anyway. Some particular highlights from the skill card pool. I've already mentioned Repurpose and Honed Technique, but you also have Combat Training, Mean Swing. She's got the weapons there for Mean Swing. Hard to Ignore. I mean, there's a lot of potential here. But however you play her, may I make a modest, somewhat ironic suggestion? Play her sober. And that's all I've got for Psylocke. Now get off my lawn. The Grouchy Nerd.